The fifth Sunday in Lent is upon us. And the scripture reading is coming from John's Gospel, chapter 12, verses 20 through 33 this week. It's a passage you probably know. It's about Jesus telling his disciples a grain of wheat has to fall, it has to die before it can be reborn. We know that part. But then he says something we might not be as familiar with, and something that can be, on the surface, a little bit confusing to us. He says that if we want to save our lives, we have to surrender them to God. He's saying we learn about ourselves by leaning into surrendering the heart and the soul and the mind to God's will. And then he says something peculiar. He says, I'm not shying away from this. I'm not praying God take it from me. There are a couple times in that passage that Jesus uses the word this world. It really means this current system, the evil nature of the system, to trample under feet those who are in the most need. And Jesus says that that system uses violence to make its point. If it's in disagreement, it will choose to do violence and harm. We see that in churches quite often, and so many people choose never to go back when there is a challenge. If spiritual damage happens, it's difficult to want to go back. The powers of this world operate under that system. I thought about the old cartoon Popeye. You know, he encounters trouble, and what does he do? He goes off, he eats some spinach, and then he comes back and he beats up the opposition. The temptation is to be exactly like that, especially if the problem is a person. One of the most influential men in the United States, in the world, of the last century was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He stood up against opposition using the way of the cross. Often there were Christian men who would sick dogs on Dr. King and his followers while they were marching for truth, spray them with water hoses. It would have been tempting to respond to that violence in like manner. And if we're not doing serious self-reflection, when we have difficult experiences psychologically, spiritually, we will reenact them without even realizing it. And that's what Jesus says here. I'm going to the cross so that you don't have to live by this current world, this current system, this ego-driven self-preservation. And therein is the good news. When we follow the way of the cross, we can live out the love of God to ourselves, to the world around us, and have a good conscience and sleep at night. And my friends, that is good news.